embodied interpretation or embodied speaking. Yeah. But shall we just read it together? And I'll read it, and then we can kind of check out if we're not sure what it is. But embodied inquiry is a practice that attends to the relationship between language and the experiencing body.
It's like an aha moment.
Yeah, okay. Good. It is about kind of marrying thought, feeling, head and heart. Okay. And in not relying on thoughts alone, it opens itself to what is creative and novel. It's what he calls about the pre-patterned more of the life world. Life world is a term actually that comes very much from phenomenology, and it's the idea that, in fact, this was Husserl, who was a phenomenologist who brought this notion of life world. And what that means is like, when we're, it's the ontology, in other words, the experiencing of myself in my world. Yeah? And it's not that I'm just me. I experience myself in my world. It's an obvious thing in some ways, but you know how sometimes we can almost separate people from their world and their experience, and how we can sometimes determine people as a client with our expectations of what they should be doing. Yeah. But how important it is that we situate the people in the life world that is their experience. Yeah. So it's a bit like, it would be the ridiculousness of, as we've been exploring, to apply Western concepts to the life world, the lived life of people here in Pakistan. And we're noticing it doesn't work quite so well. Yeah, that's been part of our discussion, hasn't it? That the life world here is different to maybe my life world in the UK. The life world of a woman will be different to the life world of a man, perhaps. Yeah? So it's the significance, in our research that, if we're working with others and ourselves, we understand our life world. Yeah? And so what we can say in that, so it's the pre-patterned more. And what that means is that I am more than just who you think I am, from your lens, if you like. Yeah. And that's really exciting. That's a bit of, when we kind of really begin to focus on subjective, the redemptive subjectivity. Like when we listen to people's voices and their experience, that's when we listen to their moreness. Rather than the kind of expectations that I think they should have. What richness we miss there. Yeah. And the arising embodied understanding from embodied inquiry is humanizing. There goes that word again. In a world that very easily objectifies self-love. So it's that notion of 9 out of 10 cat owners. It tells us nothing about the relationship between cats and their owners. Yeah. Like
Owners.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yes indeed. The cats sometimes have many owners, but also like the notion of who owns who. I had a cat who completely owned me.
And the bush.
Yeah. What was that lovely thing about dogs have owners, cats have slaves.
Yeah, that's true actually.
But yeah, I mean, it's like we have to understand from the ground up people's experiencing, and that's what makes it humanising. So there's a kind of a philosophy, a way of being around embodied research and embodied understanding and embodied inquiry. Okay. Is that kind of clear? I mean, for me, this is really lovely material. This is what you're really touching on, isn't it? This is really what you're touching on. So communicating experience is a key part of both therapy and research. And as phenomenologists, we attempt to get close to the life-world experience, to sit with it, with its texture, with its sounds, with the resonances and essences of that which is significant. So that could be my own experiencing, the texture of my own experiencing, but equally the texture of experiencing of the other. So I'm thinking here, Shraistina, with your misattunement, really hearing the life world experiences, maybe of those individuals that you're interested in, and listening to your own textured experiences. Yeah. But that's what we do in therapy. Yeah, that's what we try to do. So it's not as if we're doing anything, wacky here. This is the art of psychotherapy, the art of counselling in some ways. So we can witness a key shift from thinking about to attending to the phenomena. And that's been a lot of the work that we've done, like when we focused on Hakomi. It's not thinking about it, it's about attending to it. And there's a lovely word. Maybe in your exploration, of like those moments of meeting. I always really love that phrase of like, what does it mean to attend to the other? I'll send you some work from Peter Wilberg, actually, I just thought who might be important to you. And in fact, actually I'll send it to you all. It's Peter Wilberg talks very much about listening to the other. Listening to the other. But I'll send you, I think I might have written it somewhere. I'll try and summarise it anyway and send it to you. But it's a different way of listening. And which fits in with this model. It isn't about being tick, 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 said so, but it's that capacity we have for, what is here? Which I think is what you're talking about. That moment of meeting when somebody really gets you. Howard Hewitt Wilkinson, in one of his books, describes this quality of attention when the researcher or listener is open, and I love this phrase, to notice the very difficult to notice. Isn't that a great phrase? And that which will not be noticed without the humility to be open to the unexpected. Yeah. Isn't that lovely? Yeah. There's something in our work here around our capacity to do that. So the attention here is something like sitting with the whole body as a poetic ear, in order to be faithful to our subject. Can you see why I get passionate about this work? By this way of really listening to that which we need, that's asking to be listened to. But then we're left with the task of noting how to capture the essence of the life world. And Kate Galvin and Les Todress invite us to explore the aesthetics of phenomenology. How do we capture the richness of experience? And this becomes really important when, in our little conversation that we've just had around do we just go, oh, it's just a bit of a mystery here? Which I'm arguing kind of we do a disservice if we don't capture it and if we don't try to find a language for it. Yeah. Otherwise, our work in this field doesn't get heard. Yeah. And we leave the communicating to those things that are really easy to communicate, like 9 out of 10 cat owners or people who do CBT, get better, on a scale of 1 to 10. So it's really, for me, this is my passion. It's really important that we can kind of find a way of communicating our work, and through that aesthetic. So we leave sometimes the science, and maybe we move more into the art. So the question is, how do we find words that are faithful to the phenomenon in all of its complexity and texture? So what they say is that the words are both head and heart. They are more than words. Yeah. So in embodied interpretation, we're attending to the interaction between the felt sense and the more that might be given in interview text or, in my own experiencing. And the kind of language that may evocatively represent the felt sense. So they say then the task then is twofold. Whenever here we refer to others, I argue as well we can relate to ourselves. Yeah? So we engage or enter the other's experiences in a way that we are touched and that we re-emerge into language from the touched understanding so that one can share the insights in a way that is alive and has possible resonances and applicability to others. Yeah. So do you remember that lovely little map that I had rejigged from Les Todler's? Do you remember that little circle of like, it's the textured research findings. Yeah. In other words, these are the words that we give, that when spoken, they facilitate an embodied relational understanding of our listener, or maybe ourselves, which then allows us, to apply that a little bit more in our work, or it stimulates us to do that potentially. So those ideas of moments of meeting, when we understand it and get it, maybe we can find a way of bringing that to our practice a little bit more and seeing how it is, because then that becomes our further research, which we then kind of rethink again. So we need to deeply engage with the alive essence of the experience and then re-emerge and find ways of engaging with others, our readers, our audience, to communicate that shared understanding. So I give the example here that I gave to you yesterday, that I worked with a Gay Men's Project who wanted to describe the experiences of living with HIV and hepatitis C. And the service user-led group wanted to present the work at conference. Actually, I don't say much more about it because I talked about it to you yesterday. But remember how I worked with Sam, the worker, who he really embodied the words. He tried to bring those words out, and they could then be really understood by the audience in the conference, which was probably a much better way than kind of saying, offering a pie chart or something, or a GATT chart that described the experience of people we brought it alive, so people just went, yeah, because it touched them. Yeah, so that's the art that we're saying here around how we bring those research findings alive. So the process of working, according to Kate Galvin and Les Topras, it looks like this. We become present to the data, and the data is what is here. Yeah. And then we enter into the alive meanings. Yeah. We dwell and hold so that the meanings can form. For those of you who were at the Hakomi, do you remember one of the things that we were saying was really important to touch into the felt experience is that sometimes we just stay there. Yeah, we dwell, we linger, we taste it. We really allow the experience to come in. Yeah. And that becomes really important. And that's no different to what we do if we're confident as practitioners. We don't just move on, we do what we did yesterday in that very profound moment. If you recall, we just hung on there. We dwelled, we listened, I invited you to just stay with it. Just stay with it. And slowly but surely, the language came. Slowly but surely, the experience was given some kind of words or something. But that's no different to what we do in therapy, but part of embodied research is about applying that, to the work.
At the moment in the group discussions, I find that when words are given to feelings, sometimes it may be interpreted as being in the mind. The words have to come from the mind. And so the feeling aspect of it is lost completely because it's so easy to come into that side from the head, it's not coming from the feeling. So I think that integration in itself needs a lot of learning.
And there is something really important there about how do we give voice to things, and and it is like if we were to kind of embody it, it is about like taking it, all the experiencing, all its nuances, and we do have language as a way, So there may be that meeting space. It's probably no surprise that we have difficulty here.
And the choking feelings and so on. But also for the receiver, unless they know that, it's very difficult to explain it.
Well, but in our work, therapeutically, sometimes it is about resting with things. Sometimes it is about attuning. Sometimes we have to take little guesses. And that can be okay. There's something around like listening isn't just about this, which is where it's really interesting when we talk about attunement. And what Peter Wilberg and other philosophers would say is that in order to understand you, I need to feel you. And I think I mentioned the other day that the work of Emmanuel Levinas seems quite difficult to understand. Actually, maybe there is a little paper I can give you because I tried to interpret it. I think you might find it helpful. I'll do this because it is about listening. But what Levinas says, and also what Wilberg say, and this is embodied, is that listening isn't about one of those skills. What you start off by doing with your active listening and your reflecting back, it's all skills-based, technique-orientated, summarizing. they're helpful as for the starting place. But when we want to enter into the subtle field of real knowing, you know, what Levinas says is that he really talks about this in terms of really hearing the suffering of the other. But the way I know that you have listened to me or understood me is when you feel me. Yeah. And that kind of is an interesting notion, isn't it, in terms of, like, then how can I communicate them to you? That I have felt you. And that might be done in words, it might be done in a moment of meeting gesture, yeah, or whatever. But that's a radical way of understanding, what it means to be heard, isn't it? Like, because normally we think, and so what Levinas and a couple of other people would say, in order to understand you, I have to get out of that kind of technique-orientated place and just meet you. Yeah. You know, it's summed up really well by Rumi in that lovely quote of beyond right doing and wrong doing there is a field. I'll meet you there. Yeah. And it is in that field in some way that maybe we are talking about in terms of either understanding myself, you know, like how do I meet myself in that field? Yeah, when maybe I've got all these voices kicking off like that's rubbish, that's not research, you know, or you know, whatever those voices are, you know, but there's something in my capacity to meet you there. And I think embodied research is about edging towards that. I'm never completely sure if we ever really do it, but it's our willingness to do it that becomes important. Do you get that? It's my intention to do it that is often important for people. Yeah? That intention to really sit with you.
It's the wholeness that gets you there. It's not disconnect and this alone.
Exactly.
This separate, this separate. It has to be a wholeness that gets you into that.
Yeah. You know, and I guess we meet, I mean, lots of spiritual traditions, you know, will find a way of that level of communication. You know, we were talking about the time of day when one may speak to God. You know, when the veil is thinnest, if you like, whether that's in the early morning before dawn break. You know, and there's something about that also, if we're able to engage with that, you know, those little pre-dawn break moments, you know, when the veil is thin, you know, when we can really sit with that quality of stillness. You know, this really is a contemplative research. It really is a contemplative psychotherapy, isn't it? You know, where we just try and lock ourselves in that space. You know, some people talk about that space as the non-dual. You know, where there is no separation. Yeah, it's not dualistic, non-dual. Where, like, you know, that my capacity, as Peter Wilberg would say, he uses a whole bunch of words for listening that I just think are really beautiful. He uses, and they're all the letter H, but he uses words like harking, harking, you know, it's that, but this comes through the body, you know, harking, hallowing. Yeah, these are very different words, aren't they? Kind of listening through. I don't know if you know the word the hara in a number of Eastern traditions. You know, in both some Indian traditions, you know, is that kind of, you know, the area here that is about kind of feeling. In fact, it's really interesting, I think, with neuroscience, you know, we now know there's a brain here. Yeah. there's a brain here too.
Everywhere.
Yeah. You know, that interconnectedness. Yeah. And I find that really beautiful then when we talk about whole body listening. Yeah. But it is our capacity to enter into that. You know, I'm going off on one a little bit, but this I think is what embodied research is about, is my capacity to kind of try and go in there, you know, and to try and do that, if you like, without being precious. And when I say precious, it can be really easy to go, I totally get it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? When we can really enter into that, I'm enlightened. Almost that place, do you know what I mean? Because also our work is also about having our feet on the ground too. Yeah. And also being able to trip up and fart while we're doing it. I'm sorry to be so crude. Yeah. But it is, we are also that too.
I have to say something here again, because farting and shit, they're absolutely necessary. It's absolute physiology. And so it's not, and with fart is going the other way, it's not. It's so natural. When stuck, it's pathology.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So I think it would be not farting.
It's actually, it was a really funny with me. We all kind of went, it was a really good session we had today, wasn't it? Yes. Sorry, that's me.
And it depends on what you eat in the earlier.
Shazina, today we were in the break talking about something like that. She told me. You want to share it? No, Shazina told me.
No, there was a joke. The joke, that's what I was telling Amra about a person who, if it's appropriate, if I can say it quickly, there was this person who comes to the doctor and says that, you know, doctor, I have a lot of gas, but you know, but my farts don't stink, or I can't, I mean, they don't sound, there's no sound to it and they don't stink. So the doctor said, okay, you must have heard it, I think. So the doctor gives him some medicine, and after a week he comes back, he says, you know, my gas has become worse, you see, because now they smell. He says, okay, so now that we have worked on your sinuses, now we'll work on your
Good. Very good. Well, if we have time, I can tell you a rather rudish joke, but at the end. It's about 3 nuns in the desert.
Really had to wait to the end.
Maybe, yes. Just in case if we've got time. I'll probably have to do this off camera, won't I?
Oh, that was on camera.
Okay, doesn't matter.
There are different levels of connection. So it's just one of them.
It's not quite.
It's fine.
Intercity now.
Advanced diploma, level 5. 5 jokes.
Or level 6.
Embodied experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And embracing ourselves fully in totality.
Yes. I will tell the joke later because it is a really good joke on embodied experience. I have an excuse for telling it. And it's a very visual joke, I'm sure you know. So what they talk about is being present to the data, entry into the alive meanings. That's really kind of getting it, yeah. Dwelling and holding and finding the words that work. So I try to sort of unpack that a little bit, but being present to the data is about paying attention to all the ways we have access to the other's experiences and my own experiences there. being sensitive to their voices, body language and other ways they present themselves. It means imagining their world, staying close to what it is, to stepping back, to coming up close, to reading and rereading. Does that make sense? Here we're really kind of we're doing this dance. When I did some of my early work in my doctorate, I used this approach because I did a lot of, I did some interviews with people, but in order to process the data, what I did was, because I videoed people, and time again I watched the videos, and until I immersed myself in the conversation, yeah, and I was doing this, what is that, what's going on? Until I felt like I'd really got a deeper sense of what was present, of what was before me. Yeah. Does that kind of make sense? That kind of toing and froing almost. Yeah. Entry into the alive meanings means entering into the felt senses, attending to them. It's a kind of breathing in of the holistic, aesthetic qualities that are appearing. There's words here, isn't there, that's more like tasting them. Yeah. Breathing them in. So it's this quality of listening that's just beyond ordinary listening.
May I ask you why this holistic is not with the W?
Why the
Holistic. Because holistic is whole, not holy.
yeah, that's how it's kind of
It's English
utilised.
language.
It's how we do it. It's I don't know. Let's ask the Oxford English Dictionary, shall we?
Because I always write it as W,
Yeah,
H-O-L-I-S-T.
yeah.
So if you see it in my text,
Yeah, that's
that's
fine.
what I mean.
Yeah. I think it kind of comes also from that word of holism.
That's it.
Yeah, that's an H. It's H, I think it's like an H.
Whole.
Oh.
No, holism as, well, we'll have to get out our dictionaries, but this is really good, isn't it? This is a good example of, but what do you mean? What's interesting here is this would be, you'll find a language that comes in here, which is about hermeneutics. And the hermeneutics is the kind of way in which we interpret things. So language can sometimes be important with hermeneutics. You don't need to kind of go off on that, but it becomes interesting when we try to look at people's language and study it. So being with the phenomenon now, in the present, as opposed to back then. Yeah? It's what's here now, yeah, that becomes important. Yeah, so even if you are, as I was, like looking at some, a video that I did back then, I was working with what was here now, alive for me. Does that make sense? So the feature of this work is receptivity. Yeah? It's about receiving it and not kind of looking out at it. Yeah? A lot of research can be about, right, let's go and look at our findings, which kind of gives that impression, doesn't it? Like, right, I'm out looking for it, rather than just kind of working with it. It's like that lovely, when we go out looking for it, we have to kind of ask ourselves, are we looking in the right place? Do you know that the teachings of Mullah Nasruddin, it's that lovely tale of how Mullah Nasruddin, the foolish holy teacher, kind of is out on his hands and knees underneath a lamp, street lamp, and somebody goes up to him and says, "Hey, Mullah Nasruddin, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm looking for my key, I've lost it." So the stranger kind of gets on his hands and knees and they're looking around underneath the lamp and they can't find it. And the stranger says, well, when was the last time you lost it? And he said, oh, I lost it in the house, but there's more light out here. Yeah. And so there's something around, you know, like looking for things where they are, yeah, rather than out there. Yeah. I don't know whether that's a good story. But maybe it is. So the other bit is that process of dwelling and holding so that meanings can form. Yeah. So this is a subtle shift into a quality of listening through dwelling and holding. And in this place we hold delicately in order that the potentiality of the felt presence becomes tangible enough for meanings, messages and possible language to form. This requires a certain kind of attentive stillness. So Wilber describes the quality of listening when he explores the philosophy of myetic listening. Some people remember that workshop I did on myetic listening, where a quality of being is required. So he requires processes of holding, of beholding, much the same as a midwife would stay present at the birth of the baby. And an image given by Todres and Galvin is that of a comforting mother holding an insecure infant until the infant can express herself more fully. Yeah. So for those of you who know the work of focusing, I think before I've done a little bit of work on focusing with Eugene Gendlin, he introduces the process of awaiting a rising meaning in focusing. So when we're kind of doing that in our work, we try to go to finding words that work. And so finding words that work involves a toing and froing between the bodily felt sense and the words which resonate with it. Yeah? And you get that sense, which was the question that you were asking, and I think you were when you were talking about body mind. Yeah. It is about being in that space, if you like. So there's a sense of feel right when the words resonate. The body feels a yes or a no to the different words. A bit like Goldilocks. You know the story of Goldilocks? It's a children's tale. Goldilocks is the story of this girl who goes into the woods and she finds the house where the three bears live. And she goes in and she notices that there are 3 bowls of porridge, although the bears have just gone out. And there's a mummy bear, a daddy bear and a baby bear. And Goldilocks goes in and she finds the 3 bowls of porridge. And she looks at mummy bear's porridge and she tastes it and that's too cold. And then she tastes daddy bear's porridge and that's too hot. And then she tastes baby bear's porridge. And it's just right, so she puts it on. And then she gets tired, so she goes upstairs and she discovers the bedrooms and the bed. So she tries Daddy Bear's bed and it's too hard. And then she tries Mummy Bear's bed and it's too soft. And then she tries Baby Bear's bed and that's just right. And she falls asleep. And then the bears come back. And they go, who's been eating my porridge? Mummy Bear says, who's been eating my porridge? And Baby Bear says, who's been eating my porridge? And it's all gone. And then they go upstairs and who's been sleeping in my bed? Who's been sleeping in my bed? And who's been sleeping in my bed? And they're still there. And I think in the story Goldilocks wakes up and runs away. But the image of the Goldilocks thing is when we're searching for that thing that's just right. You've probably got a lot of stories of that. but that kind of search for, just right. And that's what I think can be really good about finding words that work. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is it too soft? Is it too hard? What feels just right? Yeah, so I call that the Goldilocks effect. So embodied interpretation then, so we've gone into the experience, we've found it, we've got the experience, and then we're kind of really trying to find the words, and then I'm trying to find ways of letting you know about it. This is when we present our research, if you like, a little bit. So embodied interpretation ends or is complete in the way we struggle to finish a poem or a piece of writing. Galvin and Todres suggest that there is a balance between showing and telling. Yeah. You know the show and tell? Did you do show and tell at school? Like that lovely thing. Like, here it is, and this is all about it, So telling involves providing enough context and commentary so that something new is understood based on our findings. The showing is providing enough texture so that the reader has a sense of the aliveness of the phenomena or experience. So Todres and Galvin offer an image of a completed work, and I love this idea, which is that of the reader being able to make a temporary hospitality of their own dwellings or houses, so that understanding emerges. So it's a bit like I can make a home for those fine, for what I'm hearing. They come inside me. I get it. I understand it. And that, I would say, yesterday, when we had that moment, was like each of us found a home for the experience that was shared. Does that, did you get? That's what we mean. So when we communicate the experience, if the listener or other can kind of go, I get that, then we've communicated something really important in our work. Rather than some kind of cold facts. It's that kind of idea of when our listener, our reader, can find a dwelling for it internally. That, from an embodied perspective, is like, yes, it's right. And from a therapeutic perspective, that's when a client can know that the therapist has really got it. That's when I feel listened. When the therapist can really get it. When the client's experience is in my temporary home, if that makes sense. And this is really interesting with Todres and Galvin, because what they also say is that in their approach, the words that they use in writing up something, they don't have to stick to the interviewees, because the experience is never fully one's own or another's. So that may mean that, like, rather than kind of doing a transcript of an interview or whatever, I can interpret it so that you can get it and understand it. So it's a bit like when you do a case study and you do your transcript. Sometimes that doesn't communicate it at all. It doesn't communicate what happened in the room. Sometimes we have to find other words to describe it, to describe the nuances of the experience. Which is why embodied interpretation becomes really important. so that we can enable the other to get it. So they use these kind of big words here, which is the aesthetics of embodied interpretation involves play, embodied resonance, care for the phenomenon and its aliveness, rather than simply our own construction of it. Rather than like what I believe I am seeing. It involves play, embodied resonance, care for the phenomenon. We could even say love. A loving presence to what is there. It also means that we have a care for the audience. In other words, a care for who's going to receive what I am writing. It's a contemplative gesture of dwelling. In other words, I'm showing you that I'm dwelling here. It's an interest in a kind of human understanding where things come from and where things are going. So when we talk about, like, if we can't quite find the yum words, it's where we sit with a client, and we don't know, we're sitting with not knowing, maybe even where it's coming from or where it's going to. But as therapists, we stay there. We don't finish its sentence, because that would stop the aliveness of the experience. Do you get that? It's what we call narrative coherence. That's the jargon. But I love it when I just get myself out of the way of that kind of emergence. And it's just right there. It is. It's that place where we don't quite know where it's coming from, we're not sure where it's going. And may I say, that probably sounds a little bit like your experience with the research topic right now. Maybe that not knowing where it's coming, maybe not knowing where it's going, but we dwell with it, we stay with it, in deep faith that this is important. And it's a hermeneutic scientific concern with how parts of wholes fit together. So in other words, it's about me kind of knowing that even if when you were little and you did those dot-to-dot pictures, did you ever do dot-to-dots? Mm-hmm. And it's like, it was just a mass of dots, there were dots with numbers, so until you kind of took time to carefully follow it and stay with it, and maybe even right at the end squinted it, then you saw that it was an elephant. But it's that notion that the sum, that there is that the parts of the whole do fit together. The dots do have a coherence. And the quality that I love in, and it's this existential concern for our uniqueness and our commonality. It's a deep appreciation. This is the researcher or the therapist who has a real kind of awareness of our existential concern for our uniqueness and commonality. So it's that thing that we sit with as human beings, my specialness and my togetherness. So it's about really sitting with that. Your story is unique, and together it's also common. Ultimately, like our humanity gets it in some way. So it's a unique story, but it's also, we all understand it on some level. So when we work, when you work with your misattunement potential project, Shaista, that the people who you are sitting with, they have their unique story, that somewhere deep inside you will resonate because it is unique and common. And that's the loving presence that we can have to ourselves and to others. Yeah. So that is the beauty of this form of research. Can you see why this is such a joy for us as practitioners to really try and engage in this way? And the invitation to you in your research projects is to do what we've just already done this morning, what we really did yesterday in those precious, precious